Welcome to Ardex Answers podcast, where you'll find the latest and greatest on flooring, tiling and waterproofing, as well as general construction for the Australian building industry.
Welcome back to Ardex Answers. I'm Monique Vanek from Ardex, and joining us today is John Werleman from Ardex. Hi, John.
Hello, Monique. How are you?
Good, thanks. And it's great to have you on Ardex Answers podcast for the first time, actually. John is the Technical Services Advisor at Ardex, and he has 9 years at Ardex, I believe. And John has a career in quality assurance managerial roles, including a Bachelor of Chemistry as his tertiary education. So a great asset to the Technical Services Department. Today's topic is one that's actually come from the audience, and it's a good one, and we want to seek some clarification on this. The difference between a moisture barrier and a waterproofing membrane. So first question, John, is exactly that, just in summary. What is the fundamental difference between a moisture barrier and a waterproofing membrane?
Well, Monique, it's actually fairly fundamental. One is to stop moisture coming from what they call a positive side, and that's going to be a waterproofing membrane. A good example is, say, for example, soil packed up against a retaining wall. The membrane you put there is going to be a waterproofing membrane, okay, and that's on the positive side. The moisture barrier is to stop moisture coming through the wall, and so you put that on the negative side. So, for example, it might be in a basement or a garage that's got the soil on the other side. Okay, so what that's going to do is it's going to be generally a paint-on type of product, but that's going to stop 250 kilopascals of hydrostatic pressure, and that enables you to turn some of these below-ground rooms and garages into a habitable space. So, yeah, big advantage, but that's the difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when should tilers use a moisture barrier instead of a waterproofing membrane?
Well, that's a little bit of a misnomer, Monique, because quite often they've got to use them together, right? Australian Standard 1884 talks about installation of vinyl, but the same principles apply with installation of timber. The last thing you want to have is moisture trapped under timber or vinyl. You get bubbling, you get warping of timber. So that's when you would use a moisture barrier, like 100%. They have all these different regulations where we talk about the substrate moisture content. If it's greater than 80%, you've got to use a moisture barrier. But in a vinyl installation, for anyone that's going to do this, if it's an on-ground or slab on-ground installation, I would always suggest they use a moisture barrier. Okay, now, for example, then you swap across to the waterproofing membranes and you look at situations where, for example, vinyl in healthcare facilities, they've got to, well, first of all, have the moisture barrier underneath, but they need a waterproofing membrane on top. And so you actually have the two working in conjunction with each other. So the waterproofing membrane is going to stop water going down, the moisture barrier is going to stop water coming up. So that's kind of the way they work.
Okay. Are moisture barriers and waterproofing membranes applied in the same way?
Yes, but the principal difference is there are a lot of detailing differences. For example, the moisture barrier is going to be pretty much the first thing you put down, and then you do the detailing with your silicons and your STB tape, all that sort of stuff, and then the waterproofing goes down. But regarding the application, it tends to be brush and roller for both. Okay, it's just that the detailing's different.
What about sheet membrane?
Well, sheet membrane depends on which sheet membrane you're talking about, Monique. There's a lot of different types. Like certainly at Ardex now, we've got our Weldtech WPM 1000 and WPM 750 plus a few other variants, and they're for tiling. But we have other sheet membranes that can be like left exposed, WPM 715. You've got the bituminous WPM 185. With the slate granules, okay? But generally with these sorts of things, they're membranes for stopping water going down into the substrate, okay? They've got nothing to do with hydrostatic pressure. But all of those ones will have problems if there's rising dampness. So the contractor's always got to assess the substrate, and they've got to determine whether that substrate is suitable for putting a waterproofing membrane on top. To me, the safest option is always put a moisture barrier down first, but the only potential problem with that is it can be expensive. So, yeah. But it's very much a safety first thing.
And is there drying times once putting down the moisture barrier before you put the membrane?
Yes, there definitely is. The WPM 300 tends to be 4 to 6 hours between coats. It's a 2-coat application, but 24 hours is when you put down your membrane. Okay, because it's a 2-part waterborne epoxy. There's a chemical reaction that drives the curing. You've got to make sure that that's properly cured before you put the membrane down. And sometimes some of the membranes we have are solvent-based, and the solvent in the membrane can actually attack the epoxy if it's not properly cured. And so if it's going to be a solvent-based membrane, we normally recommend curing of the WPM 300 of 7 days, just to make sure that full curing has happened.
Because there's a lot that can go wrong, so 7 days is nothing in the scheme of things.
Oh, but no, I beg to differ here, Monique, and I'll tell you why. Because I think most of the problems we hear about are because people are in a hurry, like time is money, and they're trying to short-circuit it. They don't want to let their screeds cure for 7 days, which is what the standard wants. They don't want concrete to cure for 28 days, which you need to make sure that all the cracking's happened. So they're looking for any way they can to speed up this process. But the safest option is always to follow like good practice, which is the proper waiting times. It's possible to speed it up with the application of a moisture barrier like WPM 300, but the problem is you create a moisture sandwich, like the moisture sort of not getting out, and I don't know whether that's, in my opinion, a great idea. I'd rather let the substrate dry.
If in doubt, installers can ring the hotline. The
100%.
Yeah, and that is where they'll get clarification on
Yes.
exactly, and you guys get these calls a lot.
Yes, and we're quite happy to help people, even if it is a situation where they've gotten themselves into trouble. We will still try and find a way to sort of alleviate that and get them out of it, or at least come up with. It may not be a warrantable solution, and we'll always tell them that because we've got Ardex's best interest at heart. But we still don't want them to be in a world of pain, and we sort of think, well, okay, you can do something, but it's not necessarily warranted by us.
So, John, what are the consequences of using the wrong product in a tiling job?
Well, there's a lot of things, Monique, that can go wrong, and we have been talking about moisture barriers and waterproofing. Something that a lot of people get themselves into trouble with is the concept or the problem of efflorescence, which is white salts being brought up from the substrate and being deposited on grout lines or on the surface of your tiled surface or whatever. And moisture barriers, for example, Ardex WPM 300, that's a great way to minimise or stop that. Okay, a lot of people, when they talk about efflorescence, they seem to think it's a problem with our product. Okay, I've used your product, I've got efflorescence. But the bad news for them is that they've stuffed up, like they haven't used the right products, they haven't got the right adhesive contact coverage behind the tiles, because efflorescence can't happen unless there's water to carry the salts. So the Australian standard calls for at least 90% adhesive coverage on the back of tiles, and we always find when we go to these problem sites that that's not the case. We'll normally pull up a tile and you'll see there's little wells of water that are driving this problem, and it's going to look a bit, oops, you were right, sort of thing. But it's surprising how many contractors get themselves into trouble like this, and customers will say, it's not the tiler, I've seen the job, it's beautiful, totally flat. I said, well, that's not the problem. The problem is the voids under the tile and the contact coverage of the adhesive. But the problem is, once that's happened and the tiles have been installed, the only real answer is to pull it up and start again, and they don't want to hear that. So I find that quite difficult, because you become the bearer of bad news. But then again, these people, that's their profession. You'd think they'd know how to do it properly. So yeah, that is a big issue, efflorescence. But that is related to moisture barriers. Proper use of a moisture barrier and proper application techniques will stop it.
And where can they go for more information about these types of moisture barriers?
The best option is always our website, and I've actually given some talks to engineers and architects, and it always ended up being about the website. Our website's actually pretty good. There's system recommendations, there's technical bulletins, there's easy access to the area reps, there's all the warranty information, and I'd always say go to the website first, and the technical bulletins are a treasure trove of information. That's where I learnt everything I've learned about Ardex, I've learnt through the technical bulletins.
Well, it sounds like we need to get you back on our podcast for another topic, John. Thanks very much for
Thank you
joining
very
us
much.
today.
No worries, Monique. No, it's a pleasure.
And bye for now.